Welcome to another episode of In the Lab with Hoopsology. I'm your host, Matt Thomas, joined by my co-host and best friend, Justin Goodrum. Justin, how you doing, man?
Doing well, man. It's a great time as always, especially with the NBA season heading towards a conclusion with the semifinals and the WNBA kicking off. So it's very exciting time. How about you, man?
Yeah, man, just another week sitting here growing my beard longer. But other than that, end of the school year for the little ones,
Oh
which is
yeah,
always an exciting time, and leading into the summer, which is still my favorite season. I don't know. It's tough to beat fall in New Mexico, to be honest, but I still find myself being a summer boy in spite of the heat.
me too.
Um, so yeah, a lot of exciting things, but back on topic, I'm with you. Definitely a lot of great basketball news to cover, and that's what we're going to dive right into today. Quick note before we do that, hope you all have been enjoying our recent interviews and content that we've been posting. If you're already subscribed on YouTube and on your podcast platform of choice, we really appreciate that. Consider sharing with a friend if you know someone else who loves sports or basketball, or even these just at large thought pieces on culture that we're trying to bring to the table in addition to the sports coverage. Once again, just thank you all so much for the support and the continued growth of our channels. So, Justin, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into kind of starting with some quick headlines initially, and then we'll continue to expand into bigger topics as we do. First, I want to touch on some award announcements that came out earlier this week and throughout the week, and even to the tail end of last week, but we haven't gotten to touch on it yet. First, I think this choice was pretty unanimous. So I'll pause for your comments. I don't really have all that much on it. Naz Reid wins Sixth Man of the Year award. I don't think this was shocking to anyone. Seemed pretty straightforward to you as well.
Just a couple of notes from the press release that was issued by the NBA. Reed got 45 first place votes. And really, they said that he was played a pivotal role with the Timberwolves when Carl Anthony Towns got hurt, when he missed about 18 games, and he really filled in kind of that gap there, averaging 17 points. So, huge part of what the Timberwolves are doing right now. And as we know, watching basketball, it's not just about the star players. Really, oftentimes, almost always, what contributes to teams winning championships is the supporting cast playing well. So that's a good sign for him winning that award. That he's going to be a pivotal award, pivotal piece to the Wolves moving forward in their playoff run for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well deserved, well earned. Congrats to Naz Reid on that. Rudy Gobert also was announced as the Defensive Player of the Year. Kind of my thoughts on this. You stave off maybe Wemby winning this award because of two reasons. Wemby wins Rookie of the Year, and also Wemby's team just not nearly as successful. Minnesota for much of the year, the top defense in the league. This is Rudy Gobert's fourth time winning this award. Correct me if I'm wrong, but very impressive for him. And I think, honestly, Wemby had a real shot at taking this if the Spurs were just a little more successful.
Yeah, no, totally agree. This when the competition is pretty narrow, and especially in a lot of these individual awards, the win percentage is going to be the deciding factor. So, well deserved by Rudy Gobert for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Like that he's able to make his mark that way. And I like, along with what you said, I like a team that has been competitive and successful, and one of the top teams in the league in defense this year, if not the top team, gets the nod here. Lastly, a big one, a big milestone for the Joker. Nikola Jokic wins his third MVP award. Again, controversial last year, that race between
Yeah.
Embiid and Jokic. Some would argue he should have his fourth MVP in a row. Either way you slice it, an impressive reign from Nikola Jokic over the last 4 years. Thoughts on him this year, and also give me your thoughts on Shaq kind of telling Jokic to his face that he voted for SGA. First, let's spend some time on Jokic before we go there.
Yeah, I think it's pretty well deserved. I know SGA was in the running to win it. I mean, it's really at this point kind of tough when you're splitting hairs like that. I mean, it's just they both do two different things, so it's just how do you narrow down which player is better at that point? And very similar records with OKC really having that breakout season. So I don't have too much of a problem of Jokic winning the award. I don't think people really appreciate his greatness. I
Yeah,
think there's a lot of factors that goes into that people don't want to talk about. I think if he was American or this different circumstances, I think he'd be well more hyped. And as you notice, in terms of so a lot of this talk about who's the face of the league, right? It's been Anthony Edwards or Luka or Wembanyama or other players. Really, Jokic is not in that conversation, even though he's won the MVP 3 times. I don't know. Well, and he's a multiple time champion. Like, what does this guy have to do? So,
seems to be a pretty clean, likable guy as well.
yeah,
I mean, we
agreed.
don't know these people intimately. You never know, but I do like that about him as well. And I think just to add to your point, and I'm sorry if I'm cutting you off here,
No,
but
you're good.
um, in the analytical age of basketball, where we have more information available to us and we analyze it more than we ever have before, Jokic is kind of the perfect mold to be a strong candidate for the MVP. I mean,
Yeah,
he is that one man offense, but in a way that's not as selfish as that sounds. He's not a guy doing ISO. He's a guy who has the most touches in the league, but also has one of the shortest amount of times that the ball stays in his hands per possession when compared to other players. So
yeah,
incredible. And then by the numbers as well, like you mentioned earlier, his numbers are just incredibly impressive and aligning with the analytical data that is so important to many members of the media as well as it should be. It's just almost impossible to argue against him. And I think Shea had a strong case, but I understand and respect the pick of Jokic for MVP.
yeah. No, totally agree. And it's like, what more do you want the guy to do? How many times have you heard the older guard say, a lot of the big men don't play in the paint. This guy's in the paint. What do you want him to? He can pass,
It's
shoot.
true.
I mean, what do you want this guy to do? Like, I don't understand what else. What more can he do in terms of his play making ability? So, it's well deserved. The second part to your question in terms of Shaq, I have
Yeah, let's
conflicting
talk about it.
thoughts about this. So, I like the transparency. I mean, how often do we hear, "Hey, don't say things behind an athlete's back. Be transparent." He was honest. So, but at the same time there's a point that he's winning this award, and it kind of, I think the more than Shaq saying that is, I think celebrating him actually the accomplishment as opposed to, I think at that time they were down 2 games to nothing and they were struggling. So I mean, there's times that maybe talk about the series later on in the interview. And I think not only with Shaq, but a lot of their struggles was dominated the topic of that discussion. And I think it should be surrounding, that huge accomplishment. I mean, this is really he's placed himself as one of the greatest players in NBA history at this point, and who knows what's going to happen later on. So I don't know. I don't really mind him necessarily telling him that maybe at the end of the interview. But I think bad timing for sure. Would I have said that to him on camera like that? Probably not. But I appreciate the honesty and the transparency and not just being fake. Being, oh, I voted for you when you didn't, or oh, I thought you should have been the MVP when you didn't. So I appreciate that. But was the placement of him saying that at the right time? I don't think so.
Yeah, it felt similar in a very different situation when he told Donovan Mitchell basically after like a big win, like, "Hey, I don't think you have what it takes, by the way.
Yeah.
I just want you to know that."
I remember that.
Uh,
Yeah.
just awkward and bad timing on his part. And I think also, and you and I both endlessly praise inside the NBA for the most part, but I think a producer should have gotten in the way of that a little bit, or maybe like try to move this like, hey, how about next time we have Jokic on, you bring this on because you bring this up because it is interesting, but this is like the night we're announcing it and the night Jokic is finding out about it. like maybe let's not pivot it that way. Let's focus on celebration of Jokic and the league at large at this point in the evening. So we basically agree. I think it was the main issue was that there was poor timing there.
Yeah, agreed.
Let's move ahead. I think, well, just quick cap to this. If Jokic repeats this year, it's going to be very interesting to review where his kind of resume already, before he has even turned 30, stacks him up among the greats. I love this conversation about like the greats and where people are ranking, just to compare these great legacies of players. And Jokic is really making a mark on that list at a young age. And who knows if he'll want to play, as long as he potentially has the ability to play. He seems like a guy who could walk into the sunset a little bit earlier than he needs to, but just, outstanding resume thus far for Jokic, goes without saying, with his third MVP. Joins less than 10 players in the league who have done that.
Yeah, no, totally agree. My fear is that what's happened to Tim Duncan's going to happen to him when we look 15 years from now when he's retired. And that kind of, how Tim Duncan got the rap of just being quote unquote not exciting me personality and kind of dry, and they'll blame the media market of San Antonio. There's all these things that don't matter. But they hurt him in terms of the court of public opinion compared to more quote unquote flashier players. So that's where I am just wondering, even if he wins like 6 MVPs, like I just don't think compared to other players, he's going to get his due, because they're going to hold certain things that don't matter against him. That's my fear. But hopefully I'm wrong regarding that.
Yeah, that could be the case. I mean, for such a mild mannered superstar, he does seem like he has generated an axe that many of the media like to grind against him for whatever reason. And you touched on that earlier and said that well. So we'll move on, but you're right. And I just wonder, when we're sitting here talking about this in 5 years or whenever, take a snapshot of this moment, because I want to see where Jokic is stacking up at that point. Let's move forward. We still have a lot to cover and a lot of exciting things to get at. The WNBA season is kicking off. Justin, as I was taking a look at Disney Plus earlier tonight, I noticed in the banner that, what do you know, Caitlin Clark is there battling against the Connecticut Sun, and it's streaming on Disney Plus. So that's something that I may check out after we're done recording this episode here. So pretty exciting, again, to see increased coverage. Give me your thoughts on the kickoff, and if you can, tell us about your team draft.
Yeah, so we did a draft. I was on the recent episode of the Kings of Sport. Shout out to Nate. Shout out to Chris from LA. Great being on with those guys. And we had a draft in terms of which teams would perform well in this upcoming WNBA season. I picked the Las Vegas Aces. I just think they're just one of the best run organizations within the whole WNBA.
I'm assuming you had like the first pick.
I did. Yeah, I got lucky.
All right, nice.
They're like, hey, let the guests go first. So it's like, all right, I'll take you up on it. But looking at, they released a GM survey, similar to other sports. You're going to see just the ranking of just the organization of, of course, Caitlin Clark dominated in terms of which star player would you want for the next 5 years and rookie of the year, those type of questions. But in terms of, who's going to win the title, who's the best coach, who has the best offense, the Aces dominated, and that's due to Becky Hammon. I really think she has a chance to, it really has not been reported, but if, I'll be honest, I'll just be perfectly blunt about this, if she's discriminated against still by the NBA, I think honestly she has a spectacular chance to be kind of the Don Staley of the WNBA and win multiple titles, and be a legend. I don't think we've really seen that in terms of like a coach asserting their dominance compared to college, compared to Pat Summitt or Gina Auriemma. I don't think we've really seen that in the WNBA game. So I think Becky Hammon has a really huge chance of doing that. Overall, I can talk about this all day, but I'll say one more point and I'll wrap it up. I would say with tonight, I always like to talk about the coverage and just how the league's going to grow. I've been very impressed. Like you said, Matt, Disney Plus carrying the game. There's the WNBA countdown show. Seems very professional. A lot more staff on hand with a doubleheader. I think the knock you could say it's we're in the playoffs of the NBA season, so attention's diverted there a little bit. But otherwise, I really am a fan of this coverage and really using the Caitlin Clark momentum to push the rest of the league. And I think so far, at least what I've seen on ESPN, they've done a very solid job of doing that.
Yeah, and I think it's just smart business move. We get word here and there of already teams are having to reschedule for different larger venues
Yeah.
based on the demand that they're getting, which is good to hear for the league. I still think it's going to take more time that the NBA has had in order to build this league and really grow it to be mainstream. But it does seem like they are taking the reins and try to ride the wave of this Caitlin Clark primarily momentum. And I'm curious to see where that goes and if, there's a big difference between Indiana Fever games versus other teams' games in terms of the ratings. And then overall, just seeing how this grows and is covered. It does seem like the media is very, very pro WNBA overall, and I just wonder on the general level how that translates to the average sports fans, and if they will kind of follow suit, and if there really is that same enthusiasm. It seems like so far there's more enthusiasm than we've ever seen in the league's existence.
I agree. And I think because there's always been the notion of, hey, no one watches the WNBA. What's the value of women's basketball? But women's college basketball does well. So if you're talking about or even, in the history of just women's basketball through the Olympics or just the launch of the whole WNBA season. So to me, that means that it's a lack of promotion because there's been great WNBA players before. Caitlin Clark's not the first great WNBA player. I mean, we can just rattle off names. We'd be here all day. So to me, that's why I've been hypercritical on the coverage. When you have perception equals reality, if you have anchors that haphazardly just go through a WNBA highlight, why should a viewer at home care? So now the networks gives a crap about Caitlin Clark. They care about the other incoming freshmen. They care about WNBA coverage. All of a sudden, there's hype and people want to check it out. It's perception versus reality. And I think ESPN finally has done a solid job with their coverage as well. And I think that's really has started, as I have stated, during the pandemic, where there's been a huge shift in terms of them presenting the WNBA product on their network. So hopefully that continues.
Yeah, and I do think, and I know we got to move on, but I do think we've heard there definitely is expansion that will be happening in the future. I think that helps out as well
Yep, Toronto. Yep, and Golden State. Yep.
And I think it's tough to grow in a sense when you don't have that expansion and you're not as available in other major markets. However, it's kind of a catch-22 because you need to be profitable to expand, but you kind of need to expand to be profitable. And I've always kind of had the impression that even if it's cutting into the NBA is making so much money. I would continue to invest in it and see if this league can, turn profit moving forward, which with the added attention it's getting, seems likely that things are going to change in that department.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. We're at our next topic. I mean, they're on the precipice of maybe getting a $7 billion TV deal. I mean, there is no excuse why you can't throw money into this league. I mean, at this point.
Right.
So, I mean, right, the money's there for true investment to see the WNBA grow.
Yep. And you alluded to it. Let's go ahead and talk about our next topic. And Justin, why don't you kick us off on this? Because you have the quote here, and I know this sports media, you're like my go-to guy for sports media stuff, and this is very much a sports media story.
Yeah, so basically, I think for common fans over the years, I don't think your average basketball fan who casually watches sports really cares where they watch their favorite team. They just want to see it. But I think the landscape is changing where there, for the first time, there's multiple avenues to watch your favorite programming, where it's not within your cable package or not over the air television, and that's taking place with what's happening with the NBA. So currently, the NBA right now is on Warner Brothers Discovery, which is TBS TNT. You have ESPN that's currently carrying games, and you have NBA League Pass as well as the local RSNs, local television networks. So right now, the NBA is really negotiating kind of where they want to land. So there hasn't been a formal announcement to my knowledge, but there's heavy rumors that Amazon will get some part of the NBA. So from what I've heard from other sports media journalists, it's kind of split into A package, B package, and C package. Now, what that's going to entail, I don't really know. But right now, as you know, Matt, we talked about it inside the NBA, and the NBA itself has been a huge institution with TNT and TBS over the years, especially within TNT specifically. And especially this year's playoffs, I don't know if you noticed, but playoff games have been carried on True TV and on TNT. So
Mhm.
this is not a factor of, Warner Brothers Discovery not caring about the NBA. If you take a look at Max, they have it part of their app. You can watch NBA games on there. So obviously there's a huge investment from a network standpoint within the NBA. But NBC, there's been rumors over the years they want back in with the National Basketball Association. So they offered a very lucrative deal, rumored to be more than what Warner is offering. And the last what I have heard is that Warner are they going to match that deal? So there's question marks in terms of what happens if they can't match it. And Bill Simmons recently on his podcast said this about the NBA leaving TNT. He said, quote, one of the funniest things ever is that we are pretending that the TV deal wasn't done a week and a half ago. I think it's done. I think Warner Brothers Discovery already lost it. And I don't know why we're waiting until after the playoffs. Maybe that's how they have to do it, but it's a wrap. NBC's getting it. I'm just telling you. So that's really interesting. I think, again, for casual fans, the league lives on social media. And if you take a look at the ratings, they haven't been that spectacular. So that tells me there's other metrics in terms of how the consumer is really digesting this product. But for hardcore fans, yeah, it's a bummer. It sucks. I mean, inside the NBA has been an institution of sports forever. I mean, it's the best pre-game, post-game show on TV. And I think a lot of people that have not really cover this in a correct way because they always say, the goofy antics of, the guys and Kenny running against the wall and, Shaq falling into a Christmas tree. But this show has been pivotal in terms of Kobe's death. I don't want another pregame show talking about Kobe's death. The Inside the NBA was the best talking about it. You know, things about racial issues, questions about China. I mean, you're not going to hear about that on other pregame shows. You heard about that on Inside the NBA, rightly or wrongly. And like you said about Shaq with Jokic, like, was that a taboo question? Yeah, but at least he can say whatever he wants. Like, and I don't
Yeah.
know, he gets that freedom within, an ESPN or what's going to happen with the NBC. So yeah, it's going to be a bummer. I would say with this, not only Bill Simmons, but other industry wide insiders, it seems like it's a foregone conclusion that TNT is going to lose it, which has huge ramifications in terms of them as a network. Because if you lose the NBA, I mean, they have Major League Baseball, hockey. They have somewhat a huge investment with all elite wrestling. That's another issue entirely. So, everything is changing, and with streamers, the thing is live programming. You take a look at Netflix, right? Tom Brady, they saw them host other live events. They're going to have WWE. There's rumors that they're going to have the NFL, the Christmas Day games. So right now, it's a thing with these streamers because they're losing subscribers. But if you're a sports fan, you're going to likely keep your subscription if you have one of these leagues on there. So it's just very interesting how the media landscape is laying out. What do you think, Matt, in terms of the kind of traditional business model? Because for what we heard, earlier on, it was like, hey, just all these streaming services are great. They're cheap, they're affordable, but now there's a billion of them. They're rising in cost, and now it's like cable. So, what do you think overall? Do you think this is a good thing in terms of specifically the NBA in terms of it moving around, or do you think this could harm the NBA long term by just moving to another network?
Well, the competition, of course, is a good sign of the health of the league. I mean that's just basic business sense,
Yeah,
and the fact that there is a bidding war and all those things that makes everyone in the NBA wealthier for it. So that shows us that if there was any doubt, I mean, the NBA seems to continue to be in a great spot in terms of the value of its media rights. Um, Having said that, on the other end of this, I would be looking at all options if this is moving away from TNT and Turner. Um, I'd be looking at any and all options to try and keep this core together. I know we have already talked about this, that Ernie Johnson has said he will not leave
yeah,
Turner. He's already made that clear.
yeah.
And you wonder if that's a domino to where the show just kind of fizzles out and this is it. Because I don't know that Charles Barkley wants to continue without Ernie, even though there is a clause in his contract that he could join another show, another network if this show disbands. Um, I think the game of basketball and some of the things that you and I talk about, Justin, the culture of this sport, I think it would be greatly impacted and this show would be greatly missed if it goes off the air. What you mentioned with the honest, fearless conversation about not only basketball, but topics in politics, topics all around the spectrum. Just honest, shoot from the hip opinions on this. We won't have very many other shows, at least not on a major mainstream scale. Yes, you can find that on podcasts and independent media, but I don't think you can find that on the major scale if this show goes off the air. So it will be, I think, unfortunate for all hardcore basketball fans out there and even for the casual sports fans because this show is big enough that their clips from time to time do go viral
They
and
do.
hit into the mainstream.
It's true.
Uh, so I think it'd be a huge loss. So the NBA is doing well. I do wonder if this is a plus in terms of the independent media end of things because you're going to have all of a sudden this captive audience from this legendary show that is now maybe not happy to go tune into ESPN or whatever hypothetically they would set up at NBC. Maybe they're not content to just do that, and so maybe that audience expands elsewhere.
Well, hopefully Amazon's able to capitalize on this with their coverage because I was listening to a sports media podcast. They had a really good point. On TNT, you can go long, you can have other shoulder programming. I mean, they did the 75 at the NBA 75th anniversary draft. There's just other cool things you can do. It's linked to NBA TV. That's probably going away. And then you have open court, just all the legends talking about it. You don't get that with NBC Sports, and ESPN has clearly, they have the NBA for years. They haven't shown any inkling in adding that programming. Maybe they do with ESPN Plus. That's a possibility. The streaming component, we could see kind of the amalgamation of inside the NBA league live on streaming. But I kind of said this to this industry insider recently. I believe with NBC, I would really be impressed with their sports coverage. I don't know what you think, Matt. I don't know how much football you watch, but it doesn't really light my world on fire when I'm watching Football Night in America.
I agree with
Um,
that.
I like the commentators, but like the pregame show is very dry. It's just like it's catered towards an older audience. The NBA is a young audience. Look who's doing podcasts. They're all kind of younger, retired players. It's fresh. Just I don't think it's going to really match what NBC's doing from a coverage perspective, and that's like you're saying, that's my concern. But at the same time, I mean, if the league is really super popular, I mean, does it really matter? So that's where it really gets confusing at this point. And also with NBC, I mean, you have games in prime time, but they have a prime time television lineup. So where do those games go on NBC? I mean, I don't know. I mean, NBC, I mean, TNT has to package on Tuesday and Thursday nights. And right now, um, you just have NBC basically having just regular, primetime TV. So I don't know how that's all going to work, even with the streaming component. So I think that is a genuine concern if it goes to NBC for sure.
Yeah, good points. You guys let us know your thoughts
Yeah.
in the comments or get at us on X or Twitter, or whatever you're using. Let us know. Will you miss Inside the NBA? Is it as big of a factor as Justin and I seem to agree that it is? We got to keep moving because we have, in spite of all these headlines that we've covered thus far, we have some serious consequential basketball action that is going down. And I want to get to that and just give some updates on the second round, how things are going, and how things will be moving forward. And let's start with what I would argue is the most impactful and interesting and consequential series in the entire postseason right now. I said, and I think it has borne out, that the most interesting series of the entire playoffs would be Denver versus Minnesota. It didn't start off on a great foot, but after 4 games, it seems like it is back in the driver's seat for that. Minnesota, of course, ripping the hearts out of Denver the first 2 games on Denver's home court. Denver getting back that heart of the champion, ripping that heart back in, putting it in place, and reestablishing themselves as now the team with the advantage once more. 2 wins right in a row, back-to-back in Minnesota. Very impressive. Only 5 teams have come back from being down 2-0 in this situation, losing the first 2 games on their home court. It's a very, very interesting and tough situation for Denver to be in, but it seems like they have figured something out here, Justin. So do you think they have figured something out? How do you see, I guess, the reaction to them losing the first 2 was a big deal. Do you think, I guess, first and foremost, before we talk about the series moving forward, was it an overreaction to count them out of this series after seeing those first 2 games and knowing about Jamal Murray, et cetera?
I think it was. I mean, people were saying it. I mean, it was pretty dramatic. Now, granted, they played horrible. I mean, it was pretty thorough, dominant wins from Minnesota. But I think, I mean, if this was like Denver's first time or something, I would understand the disrespect. But this is an established, championship team within the NBA, and I think it was pretty disrespectful to count them out like that, especially when you have the reigning MVP and Jamal Murray as well. Now, Murray has known to be inconsistent, so I think that is a big concerning. But I think what we've seen with Minnesota, Anthony Edwards has no help. I mean, with Gobert and with Cat and with some other guys, Anthony Edwards can score 1,000 points. If he doesn't have any help, I mean, they're just not going to win. And at this point, I think the attention has to be laid to Karl Anthony Towns. I mean, when he came out of college, everybody was saying this guy was going to be a perennial all star and a perennial superstar within this league. And as much hate that Anthony Davis gets, Anthony Davis won a title. I mean, he was very pivotal. We have seen him be a pivotal role and the Lakers winning a championship. We have not seen that from Karl Anthony Towns. And I think with him playing lackluster somewhat throughout this series, if they do lose, I think the blame's going to lay at his feet. And you have to wonder if the future of this franchise, I mean, do you keep him? I mean, at this point, I mean, you have the superstar player. I mean, everything's aligned. You have everything here. The momentum. You destroy Denver. You're up 2 games to nothing. If this Denver comes back and sheesh, if they just win 4 straight, and if he does not play well, I mean, I think the blame lies at his feet. So I think that is a genuine concern. I'm still picking Denver. I really do like them. But yeah, the pressure's on. I mean, this is the first time that Minnesota's in this position. Anthony Edwards, he's young, but he's proven to be up to this challenge. I'm not sure about the rest of his teammates.
Yeah, and that's fascinating as Anthony Edwards, I believe, just turned 23.
Yeah.
And that was, in looking at this series, I kind of thought, is Anthony Edwards going to be able to be consistent throughout the series? Well, it turns out there's no question he is, and he has overperformed
Yeah.
compared to expectations. So kudos to him on that. I think
Hmm.
the concern you bring up on Karl Anthony Towns is real. And I think that's been a concern for more than just this season. That's been a concern for a while. That's been a concern since Jimmy Butler kind of exposed him back in his short tenure on the Timberwolves. I think there are some real questions that, depending on how the rest of this series goes, you would assume Minnesota is really going to be racking their brains over in this offseason. Justin, give me, I know you mentioned thinking Denver's going to win this series. I would agree to that. We have game 5 going down tonight after this episode is recorded. So that likely will already have happened by the time you hear this. But are your thoughts changed if Minnesota wins game 5?
I don't think so. I still think that Denver, just based on their experience level, and again, just in terms of college to pro, with just the home court, I really truly believe that it doesn't matter until they have to go on the road. So if they lose, um, I'm not worried about them in a game 6 situation at all. Not concerned. But it seems like the physical play is taking a toll on these players. It's very physical, and you just see players in pain a lot more. Am I making that up? Like, it just seems like there's a lot more players just hurt. And it's battling injuries. I mean, that's always the case when you're dealing this far into the playoffs, but it's just more open in terms of just battling the injury bug. So, forbidding anything massive in terms of a injury woe, I really like Denver, even in a game 7 scenario.
Yeah, yeah. And I believe my pick was Denver in 7. It would
Yeah.
surprise me if Minnesota wins this game tonight. I mean, I wouldn't be floored based on what we've seen, but I do think Denver clearly has the upper hand now. And if they truly have figured something out and Minnesota doesn't have another pivot they can make to their strategy, then this may be over in 2 more games.
Yeah, agreed.
Because once the Joker has figured something out, if that is the case, and if Jamal Murray is a little bit healthier than he was at the start of this series, look out. And to see their offense make this switch and be able to perform this well against a still very physical series, the physicality hasn't really stopped like it was in the first 2 games that Minnesota won, but just super impressive for Denver to be able to figure this out. And I will fully admit, I wouldn't say I had counted the Nuggets out, but man, it was probably
But
as
bad
close to
losses.
that as you can get.
They were bad. There are some bad losses for sure. I can't really blame people too much. Those were pretty brutal. I mean,
Yeah. Uh, so kudos to the Nuggets for fighting back and proving, uh, justifying the pedestal that you and I have and many others have held them on this season. Let's keep it in the West and take a look at OKC versus Dallas. It's been a weird series. There have been lots of issues with shooting on the OKC side of things. Now, in game 4, that shooting bug or lack of shooting bug uh, bit the Dallas Mavericks, especially towards the end of the game there. It's been very back and forth. SGA had a great performance last night in game 4. And in spite of the shooting woes, in spite of not being nearly as successful from the 3-point line, especially for OKC, they have now come back and tied this series up 2-2. I know OKC was your pick for this series, Justin. I think smartly in 7 games, it looks like that could happen. I had Dallas in 6. It's been weird, and I could see either of those picks still playing out. What have you noticed so far in this series?
I think the concern is actually what happened in the most recent game in game 4, and that was Kyrie Irving. I mean, he played 41 minutes, he scored 9 points, he took 11 shots. I mean, that is alarming.
I
One
believe he
thing,
was 1 for 5 in the 4th as
yeah,
well. So it was
yeah.
Kind of a vanishing act. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, he's one of the most perennial superstars in this league, and to score 9 points in a playoff game without taking like 20 shots is concerning to me. I would say moving forward. And I think with Lou Dort too, you got to give him a lot of props for his defensive capability as well in this series. Again, it's just a crucible for really both teams. I mean, there's been a lot of knock on Luka. Like, when is he going to advance? What's going to happen? In terms of advancing to all this hype, where the not necessarily the championships, but the further length within the playoffs. Whereas we have not seen that yet. So if they lose, this is a huge strike against them. And for the Thunder, this is a crucible series, right? Like we talked about it before. NBA teams, you just don't win the title your first year. I mean, you have to go through a lot of these struggles in order to become a perennial contender. And I think this is a series to really toughen them up. And you see Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, awesome game at 34 points. So feeling good about the Thunder, even though there's been a lot of inconsistency. I still like their chances to win this series. And again, that Kyrie number, when I saw that, I was like, holy, I was like, oh man, that is a massive concern.
Well, another thing, to go back to your point about Luka, and yes, give a shout out to Lou Dort for his performance on him.
Yeah.
Luka got his numbers if you only look at points, assists, rebounds, which is kind of the standard thing to do. But if you look at his field goal percentage, if you consider the free throw that he missed to tie that game
right.
at the end of game 4,
Yeah.
look, you don't get called Luka legend if performances like this continue to happen in the playoffs.
It goes
And
the
I'm
opposite
sorry,
way.
but this is exactly where
Yeah.
those types of nicknames are earned and proven out. And I mean, people ripped Paul George a new one when he was like playoff P. I expect, if this continues, not in this isolated series, certainly, but look, if we're going a few more years, they're not going to be calling him Luka Legend anymore. No. You've got a window to get in. And yeah, I know Luka is super young. He's a prodigy. I do wonder, with all the complaining that we see, with the milking of injuries, it does make me wonder if he has that toughness that's necessary to get through and push through. Now, again, we're too early to tell. He certainly has all the talent and potential in the world to get through. I'm not saying I don't think Luka's ever going to do it. It's way too early to tell that. But man, you see such a wasted opportunity in game 4. So I'm very curious and watching very closely to see how Dallas in particular bounces back from this.
Can I say something about the complaining, though?
Please.
This is all the players complain.
No, that's true. But
I'm
Luka's up there.
I see. Well, you look at Jokic. I mean, when you see him have the most emotion, he's complaining about calls. So, especially where the rules changes took place after the All-Star break, it's gotten a lot more physical. Players want calls and they're not getting them. I just see a lot more outrage. Everybody's just upset. So I don't know. At this point, I don't really understand why people get upset about that. Like, as long as you're not punching the ref or cursing them out, like, let them be mad. You're not gonna get the call if you throw a temper tantrum. And look at LeBron James, how many tantrums he's thrown more recently. So to me, I don't know. I just, when it's just like, well, this guy complains too much. I've seen a billion kids, the whole league. Like, I don't know. I'll take guys complaining it being more physical compared to guys flopping and getting free throws, like whack calls. So
I think the difference is when you are that like 1A player of your franchise, and LeBron has cases of this too. You're complaining so much that you don't get back on defense.
That's fair.
And you leave your team stranded like that.
Fair.
I'm sorry, but that's not Luka legend behavior.
Fair.
And you are correct though. I mean, the league is complaining at large. I take more issue when it's a primary player compared to if it's a role player. Now, granted, like if you're a role player, hey, you're still fighting for minutes. Like, I don't know how much bandwidth you have or how much freedom you have to be complaining about these calls if it gets to the point that it's detrimental to your team. But I do wonder if that's something that is to the point with Luka that it's so excessive that it kind of takes him out of the game in a way, when you'd like to see at certain points a player just lock in and get to work.
Yeah.
And you're right. All players complain. Even mild-mannered Tim Duncan complained
Yeah.
a whole lot to the refs.
A bunch.
So point well taken as far as that goes. I think also Luka's playing through an injury, which I think is commendable as well. So I will give him kudos for that. And it's been kind of gutsy. It's tough to watch because he is like wincing through it. There are points where he seems to play it up a little bit more, and then it kind of mysteriously goes away. I don't know. I'll leave that open for people's interpretation. I'm certainly not saying he's faking it or anything like that, but that is something that, to an American audience, I don't know if there's as much sympathy when it's drawn out to the extent that it is. Now, certainly there are issues and past history, like Isaiah Thomas playing on essentially almost like a broken ankle that is like glorified and remembered so well because it was so gutsy. It doesn't seem like this is the same type of scenario, but maybe that all is different if Luka hits that tying free throw last night and then they, make a shot before the buzzer or take this thing in overtime. History goes to the victors, right?
Yeah.
History
And being
is written by the
clutch,
victors.
those hurt his legacy too, when you just don't hit those clutch moments. So
for sure. So point being, I'm just watching this situation very closely and wondering what the response will be. Real quick, I want to move on to the next series, but if you had to pick between OKC and Dallas at this point, knowing what we know, seeing what we've seen, who do you think challenges Denver or Minnesota in a potential Western Conference Finals the most?
Yeah, I still like OKC. Honestly, the Dallas Mavericks are kind of like Clippers light. They get a lot of hype and vibrato, but they're kind of a fake team in terms of being a title contender. Like on the surface, like they look sexy. You have Luka and Kyrie, but you actually watch them, and it's just like, are they really a legit contender now? So, yeah, and I think they have a lot of questions, moving forward in terms of the future of that franchise. But I like OKC at this point.
That's interesting. I actually disagree and would go the other way simply because I only think I guess I'm still impressed with Dallas's defense and their rim protection in spite of like the slog that we watched through in Game 4. Because by the way, that was like a '90s NBA game. That was like in the '80s with a couple minutes to go in the fourth quarter. It was interesting to see that. I have more faith in Dallas being able to keep up the pace on the offensive side of the ball than I do compared to OKC at this point. Granted, Shea is fantastic, and maybe he changes the game on that in terms of their contention chances. But I think I give edge to Dallas right now at this point. Maybe not to win this series even, but if I had to pick someone to match up. By the way, I don't think either of these teams are getting past Denver or Minnesota. Maybe a spoiler for my conference final pick coming up down the road. But let's move on. Boston versus Cleveland. I think my thoughts, Justin, were we know Boston is way better on paper. This is kind of a gut check for Boston. How impressively are you going to win in this series? Are you going to get the job done? Game 4 was very competitive last night in spite of Donovan Mitchell being sidelined. What, if anything, have we learned about both the Cavaliers and the Celtics from what we've seen so far? Boston leading this series 3-1, by the way.
Yeah, I would say there was a lot of controversy in terms of their free throw disparity in the most recent game. I think Michael Wilbon said it best. I mean, Donovan Mitchell, he is the person that's getting him to the line. Without that, they took a bunch of threes. I don't know what else you want to say about that. So
I think it's pretty close.
Yeah, it was. The game was pretty close, but just the free throw disparity favored the Celtics pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
But with Donovan Mitchell being out, I I don't know. I don't think there's any kind of conspiracy or anything there. And you're right. Credit to Cleveland for making it close as well, despite him being out. But it's just this is a star league. You have to have everybody on deck. I mean, we saw that with the Bucks when you're just missing anything that's the core to your team. It's just so hard to win. So
Yeah, no, well said. And it's interesting because I believe the stat was point differential. The Celtics,
mhm.
as currently constructed, are a top 5 point differential team of all
Wow.
time. All the other teams in that category, up in that stratosphere, have won the title. I, on the other side of things, see things that really makes me question the Celtics' toughness. They've been getting the job done so far. I think if they close this out in 5 games, as you predicted, compared to my 6 games, that's a good pace to show your dominance in the second round of the playoffs. So I will tip my cap to them if they get this done in 5 games. If this goes to 6, I I think I'm going to have my doubts about this team's toughness moving forward. And I still think they're getting out of the East either way. But in terms of competing with the West, I don't know. I have reservations about that, but we'll know more about that as the playoffs go on.
Yeah, no, it's going to be fascinating, especially if they're missing Porzingis. They don't get it back for by the time the finals happen. Like, how does that compare to Denver not having a deep bench? I think that's a fascinating matchup. So,
Absolutely. Last series of the second round to cover, the New York Knicks versus the Indiana Pacers. Again, kind of another weird series, like OKC versus Dallas is a little bit weird. Unfortunately, the weirdness here is kind of injury stories on and off for the New York Knicks. Brunson is pretty banged up, which is understandable given his usage, his ISO work, his creation, his basically being the offense for the Knicks, and much of that being banging inside, like driving to the rim and just taking the abuse to get the free throws from a lot of what I've seen of these games. And I haven't seen the entire series, but the pieces I've seen, Brunson is taking some shots to get this done. Um, I think there was a really controversial offensive foul with a screen that was set, and there was a
yeah,
flop, I believe, by DiVincenzo that got the Knicks the ball. I hated to see that, to be honest. I thought it was a bad call, especially when the series has been so physical. I know some people will disagree with that, and that's fair. You can pick a side on that and see that how you want to. But one of the controversies that arose as a part of that, and then afterwards, because I think the comments by Coach Carlisle were made later, I believe after game 2, has Indy been treated differently as a small market team? Now, recently they tied the series up. It seems like things are going back in their favor. But did you see this controversy, and do you have thoughts on it?
I don't think so. I want to pose your question with a question. What do you mean by, I guess you said treatment like of a small market team? Do you like calls favoring them in this series?
Well, I think the implication is that the Knicks are getting calls in their favor because
Mm,
they're the big market team,
gotcha.
because it
Yeah.
would be better for ratings overall potentially for the Knicks to advance compared to the Pacers. I think that's inarguable, but I don't see a conspiracy against the Pacers, just to put it bluntly.
I don't like those. Yeah, I think if you look at this series, I just think the Knicks were so banged up. I mean, OG Ananobi, Mitchell Robinson, Julius Randle. I mean, you
Yeah.
mentioned Jalen Brunson's just taking so much punishment. I mean, I watched Derrick Rose for years. Just, I mean, AI. Just a lot of smaller guys just get beat up in there, especially with the rules changes. I mean, it's just a lot of punishment that Brunson's taking right now, and not to mention with Thibodeau just playing all their guys hardcore minutes. It's just going to take a toll at this point, no matter what the refs want to do. So I'm not buying into that. I think it's pretty. I don't know. I would like to get somebody who like watches the calls. I mean, that's a Coach Nick question. I think he'd be perfectly suited. I mean, he breaks down every play,
Well, and
but
he has said that he doesn't think the referees have been
Yeah.
doing a terrible job in spite
I,
of
yeah.
popular, maybe whining, complaining opinion that's out
Well,
there.
and that's why you need somebody like neutral, right? Like, if
Right.
you take a look at the New York people that we had on our show, I mean, they're going to say yes. I mean, if I'm saying they're going to say no. Of course, no bias, and that's called right down the middle. But we talked to Alex Golden or Troy Pepper or anybody else of the Indiana Pacers organization, they might beg to differ, or as well as Corey Waldron. So, I think having somebody neutral breaking down these calls, I would respect their opinion more, just in terms of that. But I just think right now it sucks with the Knicks just being so hurt. It's
Agreed.
brutal. I mean, they have lots of heart, a lot of Bushido spirit. But I just think that's going to run out even if they somehow beat the Pacers. I think either team gets swept by the Celtics. I don't like their chances, but I mean, in terms of the viewer, I mean, despite picking the Pacers, I mean, I want the Knicks to win. I'm not going to lie. I mean, just the spectacle of them having a 1% chance of going to the NBA Finals, even if against the Celtics. And I don't think, again, home court probably honestly is going to favor the Celtics because teams are motivated to play at Madison Square Garden. So, yeah, honestly, probably favors the visiting team compared to other NBA arenas. But I just do not like the Knicks' chances, even if you believe in this conspiracy theory talk. I still don't think that's enough to save them in this series.
Yeah, it's looking that way with how the momentum has shifted. I want to go back to something you said because it leads up to sort of my last question for our
Yeah, sure.
episode here. You mentioned both the teams likely to be swept by Boston. So do you think at this stage, and granted, like you mentioned, we have to take those injuries into consideration, and this is a banged up Knicks team. This is not the Knicks team that started the postseason. But you think both of these teams are maybe less of a challenge to the Celtics than Cleveland is right now?
I I think if the Knicks were at full strength, I would be more tempted to at least have it go 7 games. But just the punishment that they're taking and this, they're such shorthanded. I just think the Celtics take them out. I think maybe they get 1 game in terms of the crowd wills them on and Jalen Brunson scores 50. Sure. But other than that, I mean, the Pacers, I've been disappointed, honestly, by their
Hmm.
performance. I think Siakam and I think Tyrese Halliburton's been pretty solid, but I just think I've seen a lot of turnovers and just, I don't know. I've not been too impressed um, compared to when I made that pick for them against the Knicks. So yeah, I don't like their chances against the Celtics at all.
Yeah, I do think the Knicks, again, mostly because of effort and because I
Yeah,
think that team is going to fight, even if it's like the eighth or ninth man on the bench. I do think the Knicks could sneakily win 1 or 2 games against the Celtics, maybe just by
makes sense.
surprise. And
Yeah,
we have seen this Celtics core be a little maybe lackadaisical or unconcerned if they drop a game or two in a series, which fair enough. It's best of 7 as it goes, but I do have the Knicks as a little bit more of a challenge to them than the Pacers, who I would agree. I think the Celtics would just roll the Pacers,
hmm
especially just given what the Celtics can line up with and match against the Pacers. And I don't think the Pacers are going to get into that um, that really kind of fighting spirit as the Knicks might in a series.
yeah.
But I think that's fair. And overall, we're definitely in agreement that Boston remains the at-large favorite by quite a bit to get out of the Eastern Conference with how things are rolling out for them. Guys, we got to get out of here, but let us know your thoughts on all of this. Who will advance to the Western and Eastern Conference Finals? I can't believe that we're already here, that we're talking about this, but we will be back very soon with more analysis on this. Until then, please enjoy the content on our channel and on our podcast feed. If you're hungry for basketball content, we've got it. For Justin Goodrum, I'm Matt Thomas. Take care. Thanks for joining us, and peace out.
See you next time.